Hello, my name is Andrew Garcia, and today I'll be explaining anatomical terms, planes of motion, and movement associated with those planes. Front of the body is called anterior or ventral, and the back posterior or dorsal. Towards the head is superior or cranial, and below is inferior or caudal. The directional term lateral means away from the imaginary midline of the body, and medial means towards the midline. Proximal, closer to the trunk. Distal, further away from the trunk. Take a look at the inside of my hand or the palm view. See these three lines? Closer to the trunk is called proximal phalanx. In between is middle phalanx, and further away is distal phalanx. Back of the hand, the dorsal surface. Top of the foot is also called dorsal or sole, and the bottom of the foot, plantar. Three planes of motion originate from the anatomical position. The anatomical position is when an individual is standing straight with arms slightly outward and palms facing forward. They are the sagittal, transverse, and frontal plane. Frontal plane divides the body into front and back, transverse into top and bottom halves, and sagittal into right and left halves. The movements that occur within the sagittal plane are flexion, extension, hyperextension, dorsiflexion, and plantar flexion. Plantar flexion is simply performing a calf raise, and dorsiflexion would be if you stood with your heels on the ground but raising your toes towards the ceiling. Now, flexion is defined as bending or decreasing the angle of a joint. When I bring my chin towards my chest, this is known as cervical flexion. Upon straightening or increasing the angle joint is known as extension. With my arms at my side, my shoulder is an extension, but if I were to perform a single arm shoulder press, the angle of my shoulder joint decreases into shoulder flexion. If I were to perform a bicep curl, the angle of the elbow joint decreases, elbow flexion. Similarly, if I were to perform a standing leg curl, that would be knee flexion. Bending forward at the hip is trunk flexion, and returning to the original position is trunk extension. In a seated position, my hips are flexed, but if I were to stand, they would be an extension. The dangerous thing about people that perform hip extension exercises, where they kick the leg behind the back of their body, they go beyond the anatomical position into what's known as hyperextension. Doing that places significant stress on the lumbar spine, the lower back region. The shoulder joint, you can stretch with the resistance band. I do this, the shoulders enter hyperextension. This covers the movements of the sagittal plane. Moving on to the frontal plane, the movements are abduction, adduction, inversion, eversion, ulnar deviation, and lateral flexion. Lateral flexion is movement of the trunk to the side, the left, or the right, kind of like a side bend exercise. Now, the forearm bones are the ulna and the radius. Towards the thumb is the radius, and towards the pinky is the ulna. So when I have movement of the wrist towards my thumb is radial deviation, and towards the pinky is ulnar deviation. Inversion is when the ankle goes inward, and eversion is the ankle movement outwards. Most ankle injuries occur by rolling inwards. Now at the shoulder joint, we have abduction, which is movement away from the midline of the body. So think lateral raise. And adduction towards the midline of the body, adding to it. This covers the movements of the frontal plane. Moving on to the transverse plane, we have external rotation, internal rotation, pronation, supination, horizontal abduction, adduction, and lateral rotation to the left or the right. Turning my neck to the left or the right is lateral rotation. Twisting at the spine is also lateral rotation. Horizontal abduction starts where my hands are in front of my body. If I were to stretch outwards, this is horizontal abduction away from the body and towards the body, horizontal adduction. External rotation, internal rotation. Now the final movements in the transverse plane, pronation and supination. When I turn my palm downwards is pronation. When I turn it upwards is supination. One silly way to remember is holding soup, supination, pouring soup, pronation. Anyways, if you stayed with me to the end of this video and didn't fall asleep and learned something helpful about anatomy and want to continue, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.